The morning sun cast long shadows across Fort Henderson as Private Sarah Martinez hurried toward the main administration building. Her heart pounded against her ribs, not from the brisk walk, but from the knowledge of what awaited her inside. She was already 20 minutes late for her mandatory meeting with Colonel Richardson, and lateness was something the strict military officer despised above all else. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she smoothed down her uniform jacket, making sure every button was properly fastened. The fabric felt rough against her skin, a constant reminder of the hidden truth beneath. She had practiced her explanation a dozen times in the mirror that morning, but now, standing before the imposing oak door marked with the colonel's name and rank, the words seemed to evaporate from her mind like morning dew. Colonel James Richardson was a man carved from military tradition. At 52 years old, he had spent 30 years climbing the ranks through sheer determination, unwavering discipline, and an absolute intolerance for excuses. His office walls were decorated with commendations, photographs with high-ranking officials, and a collection of medals that spoke to a lifetime of dedicated service. He believed that every problem had a solution, every challenge could be overcome with proper planning, and every excuse was simply a sign of weak character. The colonel sat behind his mahogany desk, his steel-gray eyes focused on a stack of personnel files. His uniform was immaculate, every crease sharp enough to cut paper, every insignia positioned with mathematical precision. When Sarah finally knocked on his door, he didn't look up immediately. Instead, he allowed several seconds of silence to pass, a psychological technique he had perfected over decades of command. "Enter," his voice boomed through the thick door. Sarah stepped inside, her military bearing automatic despite her inner turmoil. She snapped to attention, her chin raised, shoulders squared, eyes fixed on a point just above the colonel's head. "Private Martinez reporting as ordered, sir." Colonel Richardson finally lifted his gaze from the paperwork, his expression stern and unforgiving. He studied her for a long moment, taking in every detail of her appearance. Sarah's uniform was regulation perfect, but he noticed the slight pallor of her complexion, the almost imperceptible tension in her jaw, and the way she seemed to hold herself with particular stiffness. "Private Martinez," he began, his voice carrying the weight of authority that had intimidated countless soldiers over the years. "You were scheduled to report to this office at 0800 hours. It is currently 0823. Would you care to explain this breach of military discipline?" Sarah's throat felt dry as sandpaper. She had known this moment would come eventually, but that didn't make it any easier. The truth was complicated, painful, and something she had never shared with anyone in the military. But the alternative was to offer some weak excuse that would only make things worse. "Sir, I experienced some medical complications this morning that required immediate attention," she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her chest. The colonel's eyebrows rose slightly, not in sympathy, but in skepticism. He had heard every excuse imaginable during his career. Sick grandmothers, car troubles, alarm clock failures, family emergencies, he had catalogued them all as variations on the same theme of personal responsibility failure. "Medical complications," he repeated, his tone making it clear what he thought of such claims. "Private, are you currently under the care of a military physician? Have you reported these alleged medical issues through proper channels?" Sarah's stomach nodded. This was the trap she had hoped to avoid. Official medical channels meant documentation, questions, examinations, and, ultimately, the exposure of secrets she had fought desperately to keep hidden. "Sir, the situation is complicated. I am managing the condition independently." Colonel Richardson leaned back in his chair, a movement that somehow made him appear even more imposing. His desk was positioned strategically so that the morning light fell across it in a way that cast shadows over his face, making his expression difficult to read while leaving anyone standing before him fully illuminated. "Private, let me explain something to you about military service," he said, his words measured and deliberate. "We are not a social club where members can come and go as they please. We are not a civilian organization where personal problems take precedence over duty. We are the United States Army, and, in the Army, we have something called accountability." Sarah remained at attention, but inside she felt herself shrinking. She had joined the military to prove something to herself and her family, to show that she was strong enough to handle anything life threw at her. The irony that her greatest strength, her ability to endure pain and hardship, was now being questioned by the very institution she served was not lost on her. Furthermore, the colonel continued, your personnel file shows a pattern that concerns me. 3 instances of tardiness in the past 6 months, 2 missed formations, and now this. Either you are experiencing genuine medical issues that require official attention, or you are developing a habit of using convenient excuses to avoid your responsibilities. The colonel stood up, his 6'3" frame towering over his desk. He walked around to face Sarah directly, stopping just close enough to emphasize the power dynamic between them. His uniform bore the evidence of a man who had earned every stripe, every star, every ribbon through blood, sweat, and absolute dedication to military principles. I have seen soldiers face enemy fire without flinching, he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. I have watched young men and women push through exhaustion, pain, fear, and homesickness to accomplish their missions. I have witnessed acts of courage that would make most civilians weep with admiration. And, yet, you stand before me suggesting that some unspecified medical complication prevented you from walking across base to attend a scheduled meeting. Sarah felt heat rising in her cheeks, but not from embarrassment. It was anger, a slow-burning fury at being judged without understanding, at having her character questioned when the truth was something that would challenge everything this man thought he knew about strength and sacrifice. Sir, with respect, the nature of my medical condition is private, and I am managing it within the bounds of my ability to serve effectively, she replied, her voice carrying just a hint of steel that made the colonel's eyes narrow. Private Martinez, nothing about your service is private when it affects your ability to fulfill your duties, he shot back. If you cannot provide a satisfactory explanation for your repeated failures to meet basic military standards, then, perhaps you need to reconsider whether military service is appropriate for your current circumstances. The threat hung in the air like smoke from a discharged weapon. Sarah understood exactly what he was suggesting. Administrative discharge, the end of her military career, the failure of every goal she had set for herself since deciding to enlist. Her family would see it as confirmation of every doubt they had expressed when she announced her intention to join the army. But, there was something else in the colonel's words that struck deeper than professional threat. It was the assumption that her struggles represented weakness, that whatever challenges she faced were insurmountable obstacles rather than battles she fought every single day. He saw her late arrivals and missed formations as evidence of poor character, never imagining that each day she showed up at all represented a victory over circumstances that would have broken many people entirely. Colonel, I understand your position, Sarah said carefully. I also understand that military discipline is essential for unit cohesion and operational effectiveness. However, I would respectfully request that my service record speak for itself in terms of my commitment and capability when I am able to perform at full capacity. The colonel studied her with the intense focus of a man accustomed to reading people quickly and accurately. Something in her bearing, in the way she held herself despite obvious discomfort, caught his attention. There was a quality to her silence that suggested depths he hadn't initially perceived. Your service record, he said, walking back to his desk and opening her file, shows excellent performance when you bother to show up. High marks in training, commendations from squad leaders, exceptional scores on physical fitness tests when you complete them. Which makes your recent pattern of unreliability all the more frustrating. He flipped through several pages, his expression growing more puzzled rather than angry. The inconsistency was glaring, periods of outstanding performance punctuated by sudden absences or tardiness that seemed to follow no predictable pattern. Help me understand this, Private. Your record suggests you are capable of being an exemplary soldier. Your current behavior suggests someone who doesn't take military service seriously. Which one is the real Sarah Martinez? For a moment, Sarah considered telling him everything. The words were right there, ready to spill out in a rush of relief and desperation. But years of conditioning, of learning to hide and protect and manage her reality in silence, held her back. The military had given her structure, purpose, and a sense of belonging she had never found anywhere else. Revealing the truth felt like risking everything she had worked so hard to build. Sir, the real Sarah Martinez is someone who joined the army to serve her country and prove that she could overcome any challenge. Sometimes that means dealing with obstacles that aren't visible to others, but it never means giving up or giving less than everything I have to give. The colonel closed her file and looked at her with new attention. There was something in her voice, a conviction that went beyond the usual military responses he was accustomed to hearing. But conviction alone wasn't enough to excuse what he saw as a pattern of unreliability. "Private, I appreciate dedication, but dedication without consistency is merely good intentions. The Army needs soldiers who show up every day, ready to perform their duties regardless of personal circumstances. If you cannot meet that standard, then we need to discuss alternative arrangements for your future service." Sarah felt the walls closing in around her. Every option seemed to lead to the same destination, the end of her military career and the beginning of a future she wasn't prepared to face. But there was one path she hadn't fully explored, one conversation she had been avoiding because of pride and fear and the simple human desire to handle her problems independently. "Sir, if I may request permission to speak freely?" Colonel Richardson nodded, though his expression remained guarded. "I believe there may be a misunderstanding about the nature of my situation. I am not making excuses for poor performance or lack of commitment. I am dealing with a medical condition that requires careful management, and sometimes that management conflicts with standard military scheduling. I have been attempting to handle this independently because I believed it was the strongest approach, but perhaps it would be more appropriate to seek official medical consultation." The colonel considered this for a long moment. It was the first time in their conversation that she had mentioned seeking official help, and it suggested a level of self-awareness that impressed him despite his frustration with her earlier evasiveness. "Private Martinez, if you are dealing with a legitimate medical condition, then the proper protocol is to work through military medical channels. They are equipped to help you manage your health while maintaining your ability to serve effectively. Attempting to handle serious medical issues independently is not strength, it's reckless endangerment of yourself and, potentially, your fellow soldiers." Sarah nodded slowly, understanding the wisdom in his words even as she dreaded the implications. Military medical examinations were thorough, invasive, and would inevitably reveal things she had spent years learning to conceal. But the alternative was worse, losing her place in the only institution that had ever made her feel truly capable and strong. "I understand, sir. I will schedule an appointment with the base medical facility immediately following this meeting." "See that you do," the colonel replied. "And, private? This conversation has convinced me that you are not simply making excuses. There is clearly something significant affecting your ability to maintain consistent performance. But, whatever it is, hiding from it serves no one, not you, not your unit, and not the Army. Sometimes the bravest thing a soldier can do is ask for help." Sarah felt something tight in her chest begin to loosen. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, and it certainly wasn't a solution to her problems. But it was the first time anyone in authority had acknowledged that her struggles might be legitimate rather than self-imposed. 3 days later, Sarah sat in the sterile waiting room of the base medical facility, her hands clasped tightly in her lap to stop them from shaking. The appointment she had scheduled felt like walking voluntarily toward a cliff edge, knowing she would have to jump but uncertain whether there would be anything to catch her fall. Around her, other soldiers waited for routine checkups, minor injury treatments, and prescription renewals, normal medical needs that seemed impossibly simple compared to her situation. Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell had been practicing military medicine for 15 years, long enough to recognize when a patient was carrying more than they were willing to share. She had seen Sarah's appointment request and the brief notes about recurring medical complications affecting duty performance. What struck her immediately when Sarah entered her office was not the soldier's obvious nervousness, but the way she moved, carefully, deliberately, as if her body was both familiar territory and potential enemy. "Private Martinez, please have a seat," Dr. Hartwell said, gesturing to the chair beside her desk rather than the examination table. It was a small choice, but one designed to make their conversation feel less clinical and more collaborative. "I understand you're experiencing some medical issues that have been affecting your military service." Sarah nodded, still struggling with how much to reveal. Military doctors were bound by confidentiality, but they were also required to report anything that might affect a soldier's fitness for duty. The line between getting help and ending her career felt impossibly thin. "Doctor, I need to ask about the scope of patient confidentiality in military medicine," Sarah began carefully. If I discuss a medical condition that might be seen as limiting my ability to serve, what are the reporting requirements? Dr. Hartwell recognized the question for what it was, a request for safe passage before revealing something significant. She had heard similar questions from soldiers dealing with PTSD, chronic pain, addiction issues, and various other conditions that carried military stigma. Private, my primary obligation is to your health and well-being. If you have a medical condition that can be treated or managed, my goal is to help you maintain your ability to serve effectively. Only conditions that pose immediate safety risks to yourself or others require immediate command notification. Everything else is a collaborative discussion about treatment options and duty modifications. The reassurance helped, but Sarah still felt as if she was standing at the edge of an abyss. Years of hiding, managing, and enduring in silence had created habits that were difficult to break, even when breaking them might be the key to salvation. Doctor, I have been dealing with a condition since I was 16 years old. It affects me periodically, but I have developed management strategies that usually allow me to function normally. Recently, those strategies haven't been as effective, and it's causing problems with my military performance. Dr. Hartwell leaned forward slightly, her attention focused entirely on Sarah. There was something in the young soldier's voice that suggested this conversation was costing her considerable emotional effort. Can you tell me about the nature of this condition? When it occurs, how it affects you, and what kind of management strategies you've been using? Sarah took a deep breath, feeling as if she was about to jump from a very high place. I have severe endometriosis. It causes chronic pelvic pain, extremely heavy and irregular bleeding, and episodes of pain so intense that I sometimes lose consciousness. I've been managing it with over-the-counter pain medication, careful diet management, and what I thought was enough rest to handle the worst episodes. The admission hung in the air between them like a bridge that, once crossed, could never be uncrossed. Sarah had never spoken those words aloud to anyone in a position of authority. She had learned to suffer in silence, to push through pain that would send most people to emergency rooms, and to treat her body's rebellion as a personal failure rather than a medical condition. Dr. Hartwell's expression shifted from professional interest to genuine concern. Endometriosis was a condition she understood well, both medically and from the perspective of how military culture often failed to accommodate women's health issues. The fact that Sarah had been managing severe endometriosis without proper medical care while maintaining military service was simultaneously impressive and deeply troubling. Private, how severe are these pain episodes? Can you describe what happens during the worst ones? Sarah's hands tightened in her lap. Describing pain was always difficult, but describing pain that had been her constant companion for years felt like trying to explain color to someone who had been blind since birth. During the worst episodes, I experience cramping that radiates from my pelvis down through my legs and up into my back. It feels like someone is taking a knife to my internal organs while simultaneously crushing them in a vice. I usually start vomiting from the pain, and sometimes I pass out. The bleeding can be so heavy that I go through multiple tampons and pads in an hour, and it can last for days or even weeks. Dr. Hartwell made notes as Sarah spoke, but her attention remained focused on her patient's face. She could see the effort it was taking for Sarah to articulate experiences that had clearly been endured in isolation. How often do you experience episodes this severe? It varies. Sometimes I can go 2 or 3 months with manageable discomfort. Other times, I'll have severe episodes several times in a month. I've tried to track patterns, but stress seems to make it worse, and military life involves a lot of stress. The doctor nodded, understanding beginning to dawn. Endometriosis was notoriously unpredictable, and stress was indeed a known trigger for symptom flares. For a soldier trying to maintain consistent performance while dealing with an unpredictable chronic condition, the challenges would be enormous. What about the tardiness and missed formations that are noted in your file? Are those related to these episodes? Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks, but this time it was from shame rather than anger. Admitting that her body's rebellion had affected her military performance felt like confessing to a fundamental failure of will. Yes, doctor. Sometimes the pain starts suddenly, or I wake up bleeding so heavily that I can't leave the barracks until I can get it under control. Other times, I spend so much of the night dealing with pain that I don't wake up when my alarm goes off. I've tried setting multiple alarms, going to bed earlier, and every other strategy one could think of, but sometimes my body just doesn't cooperate." Dr. Hartwell set down her pen and looked directly at Sarah. What she saw was a young woman who had been fighting a war on two fronts, serving her country while battling a medical condition that would challenge anyone's ability to maintain normal function. "Private Martinez, I need you to understand something. What you're describing is not a character flaw or a failure of discipline. Endometriosis is a serious medical condition that affects millions of women. The fact that you've been managing it independently while maintaining military service is actually remarkable, but it's also potentially dangerous." Sarah felt something inside her chest begin to crack open. For years, she had treated her condition as a personal weakness, something to be overcome through willpower and determination. Hearing a medical professional describe her efforts as remarkable rather than inadequate was almost overwhelming. "The pain you're describing suggests severe endometriosis, possibly involving adhesions or endometrial implants that are affecting multiple organ systems. Without proper treatment, this condition typically worsens over time. It can lead to infertility, chronic pain syndromes, and, in some cases, complications that require emergency surgery." The implications of those words settled over Sarah like a heavy blanket. She had known her condition was serious, but she had never allowed herself to fully consider what might happen if she continued trying to manage it alone. "What kind of treatment options are available? And will they affect my ability to continue serving?" Dr. Hartwell appreciated the directness of the question. It showed that Sarah was ready to face her medical reality while still fighting to preserve her military career. "There are several approaches we can try. Hormonal therapies can help regulate your cycles and reduce the severity of symptoms. Pain management strategies can make episodes more bearable. In severe cases, surgical intervention might be necessary to remove endometrial implants or adhesions." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "As for your military service, the goal is to find treatment that allows you to serve effectively. Many women with endometriosis continue successful military careers with proper medical management. The key is finding the right combination of treatments and duty accommodations." Sarah felt a spark of hope for the first time in months. The possibility that she might be able to keep her military career while also getting relief from years of pain seemed almost too good to believe. "What would duty accommodations look like?" "That depends on your specific needs and treatment response. It might mean modified physical training during severe episodes, flexible scheduling during treatment adjustments, or temporary light duty during recovery from surgical procedures. The important thing is that these accommodations would be official medical recommendations, not personal favors or exceptions to discipline." The distinction was crucial. Sarah had been living in fear that asking for help would mark her as weak or unreliable. The concept that her needs could be addressed through proper medical channels rather than special treatment felt like a lifeline. Meanwhile, Colonel Richardson was experiencing his own form of revelation. After Sarah's appointment request reached his desk through official channels, he had taken the unusual step of researching endometriosis. What he found challenged many of his assumptions about the soldier he had been ready to dismiss as unreliable. The medical literature described a condition that affected roughly 10% of women of reproductive age, causing pain levels comparable to heart attacks during severe episodes. He read about women who maintained successful careers in demanding fields while managing endometriosis, and others who had been forced to leave military service because their condition went undiagnosed and untreated. The colonel found himself reconsidering his conversation with Private Martinez. Her careful responses, her reluctance to provide details, and her insistence that she was managing the situation independently suddenly made sense from a different perspective. She hadn't been making excuses. She had been trying to protect both her privacy and her military career while dealing with a condition that would challenge anyone's ability to maintain consistent performance. But understanding the medical reality of endometriosis also raised new questions about military readiness and accommodation. As a commander, he was responsible for ensuring that his unit could deploy and perform under any circumstances. How could he balance compassion for a soldier's medical needs with the demands of military preparedness? The answer, he realized, lay in proper medical evaluation and treatment. A soldier receiving appropriate care for a managed condition was far more reliable than one suffering in silence and trying to hide recurring medical crises. Dr. Hartwell was explaining treatment timelines when Sarah asked the question that had been weighing on her mind since the conversation began. "Doctor, will Colonel Richardson need to know the details of my condition? I'm not ashamed of having endometriosis, but I worry about how it might affect his opinion of my capabilities. Your specific medical information is confidential. However, I will need to provide him with general information about duty modifications or accommodations if they become necessary. I can also request a meeting with you present to discuss how we can ensure your medical needs are met while maintaining your effective service." The idea of facing Colonel Richardson again, this time with her medical reality in the open, terrified and relieved Sarah in equal measure. She had spent so much energy hiding her struggles that the prospect of having them officially acknowledged felt both vulnerable and liberating. "There's something else you should know," Dr. Hartwell continued. "The military has been working to better understand and accommodate women's health issues. Endometriosis is increasingly recognized as a serious medical condition that requires proper treatment and support. You're not the first soldier I've treated for this condition, and you won't be the last." For Sarah, those words represented more than medical reassurance. They meant she wasn't alone, wasn't uniquely flawed, and wasn't fighting a battle that couldn't be won. For the first time in years, she began to believe that she might be able to have both effective medical care and a successful military career. The meeting Dr. Hartwell had requested took place in the colonel's office 1 week later. Sarah arrived precisely on time, her uniform immaculate, but her demeanor notably different from their previous encounter. There was still tension in her bearing, but it was the tension of someone preparing to reveal truth rather than hide from consequences. Colonel Richardson had spent the intervening week doing something he rarely did, questioning his own judgment. His research into endometriosis had been eye-opening, but, more importantly, it had forced him to examine his assumptions about military service, medical conditions, and what constituted legitimate challenges to duty performance. Dr. Hartwell entered the office carrying a medical file and wearing the confident expression of someone who had difficult conversations regularly. She had spent 15 years advocating for soldiers' medical needs with commanding officers who didn't always understand the complexities of treating military personnel. "Colonel Richardson, thank you for agreeing to this meeting," she began as they settled into chairs arranged around a small conference table rather than across the imposing desk. The informal arrangement was deliberate, designed to facilitate discussion rather than emphasize hierarchy. "Doctor, I appreciate you taking the time to brief me on Private Martinez's situation. I'll admit that our previous conversation left me with more questions than answers." Sarah felt her pulse quicken, but she forced herself to maintain military bearing. This conversation would determine not just her immediate future, but potentially her entire military career. Dr. Hartwell opened the medical file, though she barely glanced at it. She had memorized the relevant details and understood that her primary task was education rather than simply reporting medical facts. "Colonel, Private Martinez has been diagnosed with severe endometriosis, a condition that affects approximately 10% of women of reproductive age. In her case, the condition has been present since adolescence and has been managed independently until recently." The colonel nodded, his expression serious but no longer skeptical. His research had prepared him for this diagnosis, though hearing it confirmed still carried impact. "What does severe endometriosis mean in practical terms for military service?" he asked. Dr. Hartwell appreciated his directness. Many commanding officers approached medical discussions with either dismissive impatience or excessive concern that interfered with practical problem-solving. Endometriosis occurs when tissue similar to the uterine lining grows outside the uterus. In severe cases like Private Martinez's, this tissue can attach to other organs, form cysts, and create adhesions that cause chronic pain and irregular bleeding. During flare-ups, pain levels can be comparable to those experienced during heart attacks. Sarah watched the colonel's face carefully, looking for signs of disbelief or judgment. Instead, she saw something she hadn't expected, what appeared to be genuine concern and attention to medical details. "The unpredictable nature of the condition," Dr. Hartwell continued, means that symptoms can emerge suddenly and with varying intensity. A soldier might be completely functional one day and incapacitated the next. This unpredictability has been the source of Private Martinez's attendance issues. Colonel Richardson leaned back in his chair, processing this information. Military planning relied on predictability, on knowing that personnel would be available and functional when needed. Managing a condition that was inherently unpredictable presented challenges he hadn't previously considered. What treatment options are available, and how might they affect her military readiness? We're implementing a comprehensive treatment plan that includes hormonal therapy to regulate her cycles and reduce symptom severity, improved pain management strategies, and potentially surgical intervention if conservative treatments prove insufficient. With proper treatment, most women with endometriosis can maintain normal activity levels most of the time. Sarah felt compelled to contribute to the conversation about her own future. Sir, I want to emphasize that I'm not seeking to avoid military duties or responsibilities. I'm seeking treatment that will allow me to serve more effectively and reliably. The colonel studied her for a moment, recognizing the distinction she was making. She wasn't asking for an easy way out, she was asking for tools that would help her meet military standards more consistently. Private Martinez, I owe you an apology, he said, his words carrying the weight of someone unaccustomed to admitting error. In our previous conversation, I made assumptions about your character and commitment based on incomplete information. I treated your medical condition as a discipline problem, and that was both unfair and counterproductive. Sarah felt something tight in her chest finally begin to loosen. An apology from Colonel Richardson was something she had never expected, and it carried more meaning than he might have realized. However, he continued, this situation has highlighted some important issues about communication and medical management that we need to address going forward. Dr. Hartwell nodded, expecting this direction. Most commanding officers, once they understood medical realities, wanted to establish clear protocols for managing similar situations. Private Martinez, why didn't you seek medical attention sooner? What prevented you from using military medical channels to address this condition? Sarah had anticipated this question, but answering it honestly required revealing aspects of her military experience that she had tried to keep private. Sir, I was concerned about how a chronic medical condition might affect my military career. I had heard other soldiers discuss women who had been medically discharged for reproductive health issues, and I was afraid that seeking treatment would end my ability to serve. I thought that managing the condition independently was the best way to maintain my military status. The colonel's expression darkened, but not with anger directed at Sarah. Her response revealed systemic problems with how military culture approached women's health issues. Doctor, is medical discharge common for endometriosis cases? Not when the condition is properly managed, Dr. Hartwell replied firmly. Medical discharge typically occurs only when soldiers fail to seek treatment until their condition becomes severe enough to require emergency intervention, or when they are unable or unwilling to follow prescribed treatment protocols. She turned to address Sarah directly. The fear of medical discharge that kept you from seeking treatment actually increased the risk of that exact outcome. Untreated endometriosis tends to worsen over time and can lead to complications that would indeed affect military readiness. Colonel Richardson was beginning to understand the complexity of the situation. A soldier's fear of career consequences had led to medical secrecy that ultimately threatened both her health and her military effectiveness. The problem wasn't just individual, it was cultural. What kind of duty modifications might be necessary during treatment? Dr. Hartwell consulted her notes briefly. Initially, we may need to provide flexible scheduling during medication adjustments as we find the optimal treatment combination. Physical training modifications during severe episodes. Potential sick leave for surgical procedures if they become necessary. Most importantly, we need to establish a communication protocol so that medical episodes can be documented and managed through proper channels rather than creating attendance problems. The practical nature of these accommodations appealed to the colonel's problem-solving instincts. These weren't requests for special treatment, they were medical management strategies that would ultimately improve Private Martinez's reliability and effectiveness. Private Martinez, are you prepared to follow prescribed medical treatment and work with both medical personnel and command to manage your condition appropriately?
Yes, sir.
I'm committed to following whatever treatment protocol Dr. Hartwell recommends and maintaining clear communication about my medical status and duty capability. Colonel Richardson stood and walked to the window overlooking the base parade ground. Young soldiers were conducting afternoon training exercises, their movements precise and coordinated. The sight reminded him why military discipline and standards mattered, but also why taking care of military personnel was essential to maintaining those standards. Doctor, I want to establish a formal protocol for managing this situation. Private Martinez should have direct access to medical consultation when needed. Her squad leader should be briefed on appropriate accommodations without detailed medical information. And I want monthly meetings between medical, command, and Private Martinez to ensure treatment is progressing effectively. The comprehensive nature of his response surprised both women. They had expected acceptance of the medical situation, but not this level of structured support. Furthermore, the colonel continued, turning back to face them, I want to address the cultural issues that prevented Private Martinez from seeking help initially. No soldier should feel that legitimate medical needs threaten their military career. We need to examine how we communicate about medical support and ensure that other soldiers understand available resources. Dr. Hartwell smiled for the first time during the meeting. This was the kind of command support that made her job not just possible, but effective. Colonel, that level of support will significantly improve treatment outcomes and military readiness. When soldiers trust medical channels and command support, they seek help earlier and manage conditions more effectively. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the turn the conversation had taken. What had begun as a threat to her military career was becoming a comprehensive support system that might allow her to serve more effectively than ever before. Sir, I want to thank you for your understanding and support. This isn't the outcome I expected when Dr. Hartwell requested this meeting. Colonel Richardson returned to his seat, his expression thoughtful. Private Martinez, military leadership requires learning from mistakes and adapting to new information. My initial response to your situation was based on incomplete understanding and outdated assumptions. Good leaders acknowledge when they're wrong and work to do better. The meeting concluded with specific action items and follow-up schedules. Sarah would begin hormonal treatment immediately, with medication adjustments monitored over the following months. Her squad leader would receive briefing on accommodation needs without specific medical details. Monthly progress meetings would ensure that treatment and military service remained compatible. But, beyond the practical arrangements, something more fundamental had changed. Sarah no longer felt like she was fighting a secret war against her own body while trying to maintain military performance. Her condition was now a managed medical reality with command support and clear protocols. Colonel Richardson had learned that effective military leadership required understanding the full complexity of factors affecting soldier performance. Medical conditions weren't discipline problems, and proper support often improved rather than compromised military effectiveness. As they prepared to leave, Dr. Hartwell addressed one final concern. Private Martinez, I want to emphasize that seeking medical help was not a sign of weakness, it was a mature decision that will ultimately make you a more effective soldier. Many women struggle with endometriosis while maintaining demanding careers. With proper treatment, there's no reason you can't have a successful military career. Sarah walked out of the colonel's office feeling lighter than she had in years. The fear and secrecy that had dominated her military experience were being replaced by medical support and command understanding. For the first time since enlisting, she began to believe that she could be both honest about her medical reality and successful in her military career. The transformation wasn't just personal. Colonel Richardson had committed to examining broader cultural issues around medical support and communication. Sarah's situation had become a catalyst for improving how the military addressed women's health issues and medical accommodation in general. But the real test would come in the following months, as treatment began and new protocols were implemented. The meeting had established possibility and support, proving that the system could work would require sustained effort from all parties involved. 6 months later, the transformation was remarkable.
though not in ways anyone could have predicted at the beginning of Sarah's medical journey.
The changes extended far beyond her individual case, rippling through the base in ways that challenged and improved how military medicine approached women's health issues. Sarah stood at attention in Colonel Richardson's office for what had become a routine monthly meeting, but this time the atmosphere was entirely different. Her uniform was crisp as always, but her posture carried a confidence that had been absent during their early encounters. The chronic pain that had once colored every aspect of her daily life was now manageable through a carefully calibrated treatment protocol that Dr. Hartwell had developed specifically for her needs. The hormonal therapy had taken 3 months to reach optimal effectiveness. During that adjustment period, Sarah had experienced side effects that included mood changes, fatigue, and irregular bleeding patterns that were sometimes worse than her original symptoms. But she had persevered with the treatment because for the first time, she had a medical team working with her rather than struggling alone. Private Martinez, Dr. Hartwell's latest report shows significant improvement in symptom management and duty performance. Your attendance record over the past 3 months has been exemplary, Colonel Richardson began, consulting the file that had once contained only disciplinary concerns but now tracked medical progress alongside military achievements. Sarah allowed herself a small smile.
Yes, sir.
The treatment has made an enormous difference in my ability to maintain consistent performance. I've had only 2 severe episodes in the past 3 months, and both were manageable with the new pain management protocol Dr. Hartwell developed. What Sarah didn't mention was how profoundly the experience had changed her relationship with her own body and her military service. For years, she had treated her condition as an enemy to be defeated through willpower and endurance. Now she understood it as a medical condition to be managed through proper treatment and support systems. Dr. Hartwell entered the office carrying a comprehensive report that documented not just Sarah's progress, but the development of new protocols that were being implemented across the base. Sarah's case had become a model for how military medicine could effectively support soldiers with chronic conditions. Colonel, I'm pleased to report that Private Martinez has responded excellently to treatment. Her pain levels have decreased significantly, her menstrual cycles have regulated, and, most importantly, she has developed effective communication patterns for managing episodes when they occur. The communication protocols had proven crucial. Instead of suffering in silence and hoping symptoms would pass unnoticed, Sarah now had clear channels for reporting medical episodes and requesting appropriate accommodations. Her squad leader had been trained to recognize signs of endometriosis flare-ups and had authority to approve modified duties without detailed explanations or bureaucratic delays. Furthermore, Dr. Hartwell continued, Private Martinez's case has helped us develop treatment protocols that we're now using for other soldiers with similar conditions. We've identified 12 other women on base with endometriosis who had been managing their conditions independently, often inadequately. Colonel Richardson leaned forward with interest. The broader implications of Sarah's case had become apparent over the months as other soldiers came forward seeking similar medical support. Her willingness to undergo treatment and work openly with medical and command personnel had created a template for addressing women's health issues that had previously been treated as individual problems rather than systemic medical needs.
Doctor, what have we learned from implementing these new protocols?
Several important things.
First, soldiers with chronic conditions perform better when they receive proper medical treatment rather than attempting independent management.
Second, open communication between medical, command, and soldiers improves outcomes for everyone involved. Third, many of the conditions we thought were rare in military populations are actually quite common but underreported due to fear of career consequences.
Sarah listened to this discussion with a mixture of pride and amazement.
Her individual struggle with endometriosis had somehow contributed to broader changes in military medical care. But the real impact had been personal. She was now a more effective soldier than she had ever been, even before her symptoms became severe. Private Martinez, the colonel said, turning his attention back to her, I understand you've been working with Dr. Hartwell on educational materials for other soldiers dealing with similar conditions.
This was true, though it had begun informally.
Other women on base had approached Sarah after learning about her successful treatment. They wanted to know how she had found the courage to seek help and what the process had been like.
Those conversations had evolved into organized peer support sessions that complemented formal medical treatment.
Yes, sir.
We've developed an information program that helps soldiers understand when to seek medical attention for reproductive health issues and what to expect from military medical care. Dr. Hartwell has been training me to facilitate these sessions as part of my military education development. The peer support program had proven remarkably effective. Soldiers were more likely to seek help when they heard from another soldier who had successfully navigated treatment while maintaining military service. Sarah had discovered an unexpected talent for helping others understand that seeking medical care was a sign of strength and military professionalism rather than weakness. Colonel Richardson stood and walked to his wall of commendations, but this time his focus was on a new addition, a letter from the base commander recognizing the innovative medical and command protocols that had been developed through Sarah's case. The recognition extended to all parties involved, acknowledging that effective military medicine required collaboration between medical professionals, command personnel, and soldiers themselves.
Private Martinez, I have an announcement that might interest you.
The protocols we've developed here are being reviewed for implementation across multiple military installations. Your case study has been submitted to military medical leadership as an example of effective chronic condition management in active duty personnel. Sarah felt a rush of emotion that she struggled to contain within military bearing. When she had first sought medical help, her only goal had been to save her own military career. The idea that her experience might help other soldiers facing similar challenges had never occurred to her.
Furthermore, the colonel continued, Dr. Hartwell has recommended you for advanced medical training that would allow you to formalize your peer education role.
This would involve additional medical education and certification in health education while maintaining your current military occupational specialty. The opportunity represented more than career advancement. It was recognition that her experience with chronic illness had given her valuable skills and knowledge that could benefit others. Military service had taught her discipline, endurance, and teamwork, but managing endometriosis had taught her resilience, self-advocacy, and the importance of proper medical care.
Dr. Hartwell nodded approvingly. Private Martinez has demonstrated exceptional ability to translate medical information into practical guidance for other soldiers.
Her personal experience combined with formal training would make her uniquely qualified to bridge the gap between medical care and military service. The meeting continued with discussion of Sarah's ongoing treatment plan, but the conversation had shifted from crisis management to career development. Her endometriosis was now a managed condition that required ongoing attention but no longer threatened her ability to serve effectively. As the formal portion of the meeting concluded, Colonel Richardson asked Dr. Hartwell to remain for a few additional minutes. Sarah sensed this was her cue to leave, but the colonel gestured for her to stay. Private Martinez, I want to address something that's been on my mind since our first meeting. When you initially came to my office with what I perceived as excuses for poor performance, I responded with skepticism and disciplinary threats. I've thought a great deal about that interaction and the assumptions I made. Sarah remained at attention, uncertain where this conversation was leading. Military leadership requires making quick judgments based on available information. But it also requires the wisdom to recognize when initial judgments are wrong and the courage to acknowledge mistakes. My initial response to your situation was based on incomplete understanding and biases I didn't recognize I held. The colonel's words carried weight beyond personal apology. They represented acknowledgement that military culture sometimes created barriers to effective medical care and that leadership required ongoing learning and adaptation. I've learned that effective command involves understanding the full complexity of factors affecting soldier performance. Medical conditions aren't discipline problems, proper support often improves rather than compromises military effectiveness, and soldiers who trust medical and command systems serve more effectively. Sarah felt compelled to respond. Sir, if I may, I think we both learned important lessons. I learned that seeking help is not weakness, that proper medical care improves performance, and that military systems can be supportive when approached correctly.
You learned that medical conditions require understanding rather than punishment. Both lessons have made us more effective.
The colonel nodded appreciatively.
Sarah's response demonstrated the kind of mature reflection that marked good soldiers and future leaders.
Dr. Hartwell smiled at the exchange. This case has demonstrated something important about military medicine, that the best outcomes occur when medical professionals, command personnel, and soldiers work collaboratively rather than operating in isolation.
Private Martinez's success isn't just about medical treatment, it's about creating systems that support both health and military effectiveness.
6 months after their first confrontational meeting, Sarah and Colonel Richardson had developed a professional relationship based on mutual respect and shared commitment to military excellence. Her endometriosis was no longer a source of shame or career anxiety, but rather a managed condition that had taught her valuable lessons about resilience, advocacy, and the importance of proper support systems. The transformation extended beyond the individuals involved. The base had implemented new protocols for managing chronic conditions, improved training for command personnel on medical accommodation, and enhanced communication between medical and command functions. Other military installations were studying these innovations for potential implementation. As Sarah left the colonel's office, she reflected on the journey from that first terrifying meeting to this moment of recognition and opportunity. Her military career had not only survived her medical condition, it had been strengthened by learning to manage it effectively. She had discovered that true military strength included the wisdom to seek help when needed and the courage to be honest about personal challenges. The real victory wasn't conquering her endometriosis, because chronic conditions are managed rather than cured. The victory was learning to serve effectively while managing her health properly, finding support systems that worked, and discovering that military service could accommodate medical realities when approached with honesty, proper treatment, and collaborative problem-solving. Sarah Martinez had become not just a successful soldier managing a chronic condition, but an advocate for other soldiers facing similar challenges. Her story had evolved from individual struggle to systemic improvement, demonstrating that personal courage combined with proper support could transform both individual lives and institutional culture. The scars that had once been sources of shame and secrecy had become symbols of survival, strength, and the importance of seeking help when needed. In revealing her truth, Sarah had discovered not vulnerability, but the foundation for a stronger and more authentic form of military service.